Hi, I'm Mary. I'm working with my husband Samuel at his family's small business. The business, run by my father-in-law Liam, has about 6 employees. Liam is quiet and doesn't get involved much in day-to-day tasks. Instead, Samuel, who will likely be the next president, is very dedicated and works hard with clients and new projects. Everyone comes together for big projects, creating a lively and energetic atmosphere. I've been a part of this for 8 years since marrying Samuel. Recently, my mother-in-law Amanda has expressed some concerns about me being involved. When I came home early to make dinner while Samuel worked late, Amanda confronted me, saying, "How long are you going to stay in our family business?" It seemed like she was more focused on criticizing me than enjoying her retirement. In response, I kept calm and asked, "What do you mean by clinging?" Amanda jumped in, suggesting that my marriage to Samuel was just a way for me to get a job at their company and that I was taking advantage of it. This wasn't the first time she had made such accusations, and it was becoming a regular issue. When I married Samuel, I chose to leave my old job and join his family's business because I wanted to, not because I had no other options, as Amanda seemed to think. I tried to explain, "Mom, it's not that I couldn't work elsewhere. I chose to be here." But she didn't seem to understand and continued to believe her own assumptions about my reasons. The tension with Amanda went beyond just words. Even though she had promised to manage the household after retiring, she didn't help out much. Instead, she insisted, "I've worked all my life. Now it's the daughter-in-law's turn to handle the household duties." So I often ended up managing dinner and cleanup. One afternoon, I mustered up the courage to talk to Amanda about a problem that had been bothering me. "Amanda," I started carefully, "I've noticed that there are often dirty dishes left in the sink. It would really help if you could clean up after yourself." Instead of responding calmly, Amanda reacted angrily. She accused me of overstepping my role as a daughter-in-law and trying to impose rules in her home. I was worried about dinner getting delayed because of this argument, so I tried to stay calm and suggested, "Mom, let's talk about this later. I need to start preparing dinner." Amanda agreed and went to the living room, leaving me to focus on getting the meal ready. Both Liam and Samuel had seen Amanda's harsh treatment of me and tried to step in when they could, but their efforts often seemed to have little effect. When they spoke up, it usually only made Amanda more upset with me. Despite their concern and attempts to help, Amanda's words were still painful. While I never faced physical violence, the emotional hurt was significant. Liam and Samuel's support was crucial in helping me cope with Amanda's harsh remarks, but it was especially tested on one tough morning. After cleaning up from breakfast and getting ready to leave for work, Amanda suddenly shouted, "Oh my, what a mess. A trash heap here." And without any warning, she threw a bucket of water on my handbag. I was stunned, feeling a mix of shock and anger. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice shaking with disbelief. Amanda's response was dismissive and childish. "Oh, was that your stuff? I thought it was just a big piece of trash." Her careless attitude only made me more upset. "Even if you thought it was trash, who pours water on it?" I asked, struggling to understand her lack of concern. As I sat across from Amanda in the morning light, she looked cold and determined, as if she had made up her mind to take a drastic step. "What kind of reasoning is that? Now the carpet is soaked, and what about the vacuum cleaner?" I said, frustrated and confused, as I tried to dry my important work documents. Amanda, with a chilling indifference, said, "You don't need to go to work anymore." I was completely bewildered. "Excuse me," I replied, stunned and in disbelief. Amanda's next words felt like a sharp blow to my heart. "You've been clinging to this house for 8 years, but today I can finally get rid of you." Her voice was filled with anger and determination I had never seen from her before. I was overwhelmed with sadness and confusion. "Getting rid of me?" I repeated, my voice trembling. She made me feel like a complete outsider in this family. "My daughter is joining the company, so you need to leave. Today is your last day. Just bow your head to your father-in-law and Samuel and apologize for all the trouble you've caused." Her mocking laughter only deepened my hurt. She was using my job to force me out. I had dedicated years to this role, building respect and creating memories. I was shocked and heartbroken, struggling to understand how my sacrifices seemed so meaningless to her. "Are you sure about this? Wasn't Emma working in a clothing store in Philadelphia?" I asked, confused and worried. My job was more than just a paycheck. It was important to me. Meanwhile, Emma, my sister-in-law, was apparently tired of city life and wanted to return. She said she was tired of dealing with the cold people in Philadelphia, so I promised her a job when she came back, Amanda said with finality. "She's coming back immediately, and now that she is, I want you out of this house." Her words hit me like a freezing gust of wind. With one sweeping decision, she was appending my life and dismissing my role in the family without any chance for discussion. She handed me an envelope. "I've written your resignation letter," she said, effectively banishing me from our home. In that moment, my heart felt completely shattered. All my years of hard work and dedication seemed to be dismissed as if they were nothing but scraps of paper. Amanda's actions had ripped apart the fabric of our family bond, leaving it deeply scarred. With a heavy heart, I walked the short 5 minutes to the company, a route I had traveled many times before, but never with such a swirl of emotions. Each step under the cool morning sky felt heavy with the weight of the situation. When I arrived at the office, I told my father-in-law, Liam, and my husband, Samuel, about Amanda's harsh decision. They looked shocked and restrained, but they managed to stay calm despite the chaos. They suggested that maybe stepping away for a while could show Amanda the real impact of her demands. This idea sent my heart into even more turmoil. After working so hard for the family business for years, the thought of taking a break longer than the short Thanksgiving or Christmas holidays felt overwhelming and strange. Encouraged by Samuel and Liam's supported advice, "Why don't you spread your wings for a change?" I decided to take a short trip. As I packed, I reflected on my life, the choices I had made, and what the future might hold. Meanwhile, my sister-in-law, Emma, who was supposed to replace me at the company, arrived unexpectedly late at 2 p.m. Her careless attitude left Samuel and Liam frustrated and confused. Despite their attempts to help her understand the business, Emma seemed uninterested. Hearing this made me anxious about the company's future, even as I looked forward to my trip. I left without another word to Amanda and quickly set off. As the train moved, I looked out at the changing scenery, using the time to think about my past and future. The trip gave me a chance to take a break and reflect. While enjoying local seafood specialties, I often thought about my family and the business. On the 5th day of my getaway, my peaceful time was suddenly interrupted by a tearful call from Emma. "What's going on?" Mom said it was an easy job, just sitting in a chair, but Samuel and Dad are acting like I can't do anything right, Emma complained. Her words mirrored what my mother-in-law had probably told her, and I was taken aback. Even though I was enjoying a more relaxed pace during my trip, I knew it was time to help Emma face reality. "So Emma, how good are you with computers?" I asked, sensing her hesitation. "Well, I usually watch videos online and play games too," she replied. Her answer suggested she wasn't very skilled with computers. I asked her if she knew how to use software tools like Word or Excel. Her confused response surprised me, especially since she had worked in the Philadelphia apparel industry, where tasks like tracking sales and managing inventory would have required basic computer skills. "Can you handle calculations for sales or fill out documents?" I asked. She confidently said she could do those tasks. However, when I asked, "Can you calculate the right amount of tax?" her confidence wavered, and she answered uncertainly. This wasn't just about her math skills, but about her ability to apply them in a real business setting. While Emma might have other talents, it was clear that she wasn't sure about the skills needed for the job. Her discomfort with calculations seemed to be a big part of why Liam and Samuel were criticizing her. "It's crucial to confront the motives of my mother-in-law and her supporters who want to push me out," I said. "Since you're taking over my role, I expect you to manage the accounting tasks properly. Remember that email etiquette is important. A casual tone might work with friends, but it's not suitable for business communications. Also, you'll be responsible for scheduling staff shifts. Our team is small, but we take everyone's requests for time off seriously, so make sure not to prioritize your convenience over theirs." I advised her firmly, continuing to outline her responsibilities. I could hear Emma sobbing on the other end of the line. It was a tough conversation, but it was necessary for her to understand the reality and expectations of the role she was stepping into. Emma abruptly ended the call, clearly overwhelmed by the tasks at hand. Over the next 4 days, I took the opportunity to explore Philadelphia, the very place Emma had left. Surprisingly, I found the people there warmer than expected, which was a stark contrast to the cold-hearted nature of my mother-in-law, Amanda, and Emma, who seemed determined to push me out. A week after leaving my job, I returned to my in-laws' house. As soon as I arrived, Amanda confronted me, her face red with fury. "How dare you make my daughter cry? You won't get away with this." Amanda yelled, her eyes filled with anger and confusion. Before she could reach me, Samuel and Liam stepped in, trying to calm her down. Despite their efforts, Amanda's anger showed no signs of easing. Samuel explained calmly but firmly, "Emma is upset because she was scolded for trying to boss around her employees, even though she doesn't know how to do the job properly. It's not Mary's fault. Besides, Mary hasn't been here for a week, so she couldn't have upset Emma." Amanda shot back emotionally, "It's because of her. This woman is the reason for Emma's troubles." She accused me without any real basis. "Where is Emma, by the way?" I asked, looking around the room. She was nowhere to be found, adding to the mystery. "It's odd. Emma has nowhere else to go since she gave up her apartment in Philadelphia. I assumed she'd be here," I said, puzzled. Samuel then shared, "Emma's locked herself in her room. She's been crying and doesn't want to go to work anymore. She's overwhelmed because she doesn't have the skills needed for the job." Amanda was still upset and accused, "You've been turning Samuel and Liam against me. They wouldn't say the company is doing better with you instead of Emma unless you made them think badly about her." Samuel sighed deeply, clearly tired of the family drama and his failed attempts to clear things up. "Mom," he started again, trying to explain, "it might sound unusual, but Mary is really good at her job. She's certified in bookkeeping, she's great at secretarial work, and she even studied Spanish abroad. She manages all the multilingual communications of the company." He said this proudly. Amanda looked surprised, obviously not knowing about my qualifications and what I had done. "That sounds like something from a TV show," she mumbled. Thinking back, I shared that in college I was so focused on getting various certifications and studying that I barely had time for social activities or romance. It was during this time that I met Samuel when he visited my company for business. I found myself telling the story of how we first met, hoping to clear up misunderstandings and show the reality of our lives. However, I realized Amanda wasn't interested in hearing about my qualifications or past achievements, so I steered the conversation back to the current situation. In short, I took care of many different tasks at the company, like accounting, scheduling, talking with other companies, and managing employee shifts, I explained, describing my wide range of responsibilities. Samuel added, "The work environment has been much better since you became less involved, Mom." Amanda was visibly surprised by his comment. At that moment, Liam, Samuel's father, chimed in with unexpected news. "We're thinking about closing the company soon. Emma made a big mistake. Instead of preparing some important documents, she decided to answer phone calls because she thought it would be more fun. While we were away, she was rude to an important contact from another company, which could cause serious problems." I was shocked and covered my mouth with my hand. "I can't believe Emma would do something like that," I murmured, feeling disbelief and fear about how her actions could potentially ruin the company. While I was worrying about everything that was happening, the situation took another unexpected turn. When I explained our situation to the president of the other company, he suggested it might be time to think about merging our companies. He was interested in taking over our family business. Liam continued, "This was unexpected but hopeful news. A merger could help stabilize our customer base, which Samuel has been working hard to achieve through his efforts in sales." This news was a relief to Samuel and Liam, but not to Amanda. She suddenly objected, "That's not acceptable. Samuel should become the president. This is our company, isn't it? He shouldn't just be an employee." Amanda exclaimed passionately, unable to accept losing the prestige of owning a company. Her outburst caught Emma's attention, and she came downstairs to see what was going on. Amid the chaos, Liam spoke up with a calm but firm tone, "I am divorcing you. You've not only resisted change and neglected your responsibilities at home and with the family, but I've also found out about your affairs with younger men. I can't support this behavior any longer." This announcement shocked everyone, especially Samuel and me. Liam then took some divorce papers and a photo of Amanda with a young man from a shelf in the living room and placed them on the table. "If you look at these divorce papers now and pack up your things, I won't ask for alimony. Trying to get money from you would be pointless," he said firmly. "How can you say that? Haven't I dedicated myself to this house all these years?" Amanda protested. "Have you done any real housework in the last 8 years? Spending someone else's money on young men doesn't count as devotion to this house," Liam replied, sounding more frustrated than we'd ever heard him. This was the first time we saw this stern side of Liam, who was usually mild-mannered, as he addressed the deep-seated issues in the family. In the middle of all this family drama, seeing Liam, usually so calm and controlled, looking visibly upset was a shock to everyone, especially Emma, who had just walked into the room. She shook slightly, clearly shocked and scared. "Emma, this affects you too," Liam said firmly. "You came back because you couldn't make it on your own in Philadelphia. Now you can't even find a job here, and you act like you're better than everyone else. You've stopped trying to work altogether and seem to be avoiding responsibility. It's time for you to leave this house as well." Emma was stunned, her face showing confusion and denial. "Wait a minute, Dad. Even if Mom has her problems, I'm still your daughter, right?" she protested, desperately trying to hold on to her place in the family. Amanda, feeling hurt by her daughter's words, asked in shock, "Are you betraying me now, Emma?" Her voice was filled with hurt and disbelief. As things got more heated, Liam quickly stepped in to prevent more arguments. "To avoid more trouble, I've arranged for both of you to stay with someone I know until you get back on your feet. They'll be here soon to pick you up, so please pack your essential things," he said firmly, making it clear there was no room for discussion. With heavy hearts and no other options, Amanda and Emma packed up their belongings. Soon after, Liam's acquaintance, who managed a factory with living quarters, arrived to take them to their temporary home. Meanwhile, Samuel, Liam, and I used this time to inform our employees about the upcoming merger with a larger company, preparing them for the changes and challenges ahead. During these big changes, I found out I was pregnant. I shared the happy news with the president of the company acquiring ours. He was excited and promised to find a suitable replacement for my position to ensure a smooth transition. With the promise of new opportunities and the excitement of our growing family, Samuel and Liam threw themselves into their work even more, motivated by the bright future that lay ahead.
Life has a way of surprising you just when you don't expect it. I'm Ella, and I work as an economist. If you had asked me a few years ago, I would have told you that everything was perfect. A loving husband named Mark, a sweet daughter named Lily, and a comfortable home that belonged to us. But let's not jump ahead. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the days filled with dreams and plans for what lay ahead. It was a calm Sunday afternoon, the kind where the sun lazily peeks through the curtains, and the aroma of fresh bread from Mark's bakery wafts through the air. Mark was in the kitchen, his hands covered in flour, a focused expression on his face that always brought a smile to mine. "Hey, Ella, can you grab the vanilla extract? It's on the top shelf," Mark called out, still engrossed in his mixing bowl. I went to the pantry, reaching for the small bottle. "You could make things easier to reach for me, you know," I teased, handing him the extract. Mark grinned, wiping his hands on his apron. "Where's the fun in that? I like it when you have to stretch," he said. I playfully rolled my eyes. "You're impossible, you know that." "That's why you married me," he quipped, turning back to his dough. Lily, our 6-year-old, lay sprawled on the living room floor, surrounded by her coloring books. She hummed a tune, completely absorbed in her artwork. "Mommy, look." "I'm drawing a picture of our family," she exclaimed, waving me over. "That's fantastic, Lily." Turning to the bakery, I asked Mark, "Have you thought about our conversation on expanding?" My tone was a bit unsure. Mark's expression shifted, a frown appearing on his forehead. "Ella, we've discussed this. The bakery is doing well as it is. Why complicate things? But we could achieve so much more for Lily's future and maybe even get that dream house," I persisted. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Ella. I like the bakery the way it is, small, manageable. I don't want the hassle of a larger place." I felt a hint of frustration but chose not to push it. Okay. I just think we should aim higher, that's all." Mark shrugged, a touch of irritation in his voice. "Maybe. Let's just enjoy today, okay? No more talk about expanding." I nodded, not wanting to spoil the day. "Sure, Mark. Let's savor our Sunday." As the day came to an end, a sense of unease lingered. Mark and I had always been a team, dreaming and planning together. But lately, it felt like we were on different pages, especially concerning ambition and our future. As days passed and turned into weeks, the light-hearted banter between Mark and me lost its spark. The bakery, once a symbol of our shared dreams, became a stagnant reminder of what could have been. I was focused on climbing the corporate ladder, while Mark seemed content with the status quo. The first signs of trouble emerged. One evening, I returned home from a taxing day at work, my mind filled with numbers and projections. Mark lounged in the living room, scrolling through his phone. The bakery had closed early, and he hadn't bothered to pick up Lily from school. My mother had stepped in, as she often did these days. "Mark, you were supposed to pick up Lily today." "I had a meeting, and I couldn't make it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mark didn't look up. "Oh, was that today? I forgot. Sorry." "Forgot, Mark. This is becoming a habit. You need to step up," I expressed, frustration seeping into my tone. Mark finally looked up, annoyance flashing in his eyes. I said, "I'm sorry, Ella." "What more do you want? I'm not the only parent here that's strong." Taking a deep breath, I tried to control my temper. "It's not just about picking up Lily, Mark. It's about us, about our future. Don't you think we should be doing more for her, for us?" Mark shrugged, an indifferent expression on his face. "We're doing fine, Ella. Why are you always pushing for more? Can't you just be happy with what we have?" Sitting down, I felt a mix of anger and sadness. "I am happy, Mark, but I also want more for our daughter, for our family. Is that so wrong?" Mark abruptly stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. "You know what, Ella? I'm tired of this. Every day, the same lecture about wanting more. I'm going to my mom's." With that, he grabbed his keys and left, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a growing sense of dread. This wasn't the first time he had sought refuge with his mother, Susan, during our disagreements. It was becoming his default response, and I was left questioning my place in this marriage. The next day, Susan called, and her tone was far from friendly. "Ella, what's this I hear about you and Mark fighting again? You're pushing him too hard. He's happy with his bakery. Why can't you be?" Susan's voice was sharp and accusatory. I clenched the phone tighter, trying to remain calm. "Susan, I'm just thinking about our future, about Lily's future. Mark and I need to be on the same page." "Well, maybe your page is the problem, Ella. You're always wanting more. Mark is a simple man, and you knew that when you married him," Susan retorted. I felt a surge of anger. "Simple doesn't mean stagnant, Susan. I'm trying to build a better future for all of us." Susan scoffed. "You're just being ungrateful and greedy. Mark is doing his best." The conversation ended shortly after with no resolution in sight. I hung up, feeling more alone than ever. Trouble slammed into us like a freight train, hitting with full force. Mark's Bakery, once the heart of our small community, started losing its charm and customers. Bills piled up, and the once cozy bakery felt more like a sinking ship. I was putting in extra hours at work, trying to keep us afloat, but it felt like bailing water out of a boat with a hole in it. One evening, I found Mark slumped at the kitchen table, a stack of bills in front of him, his face reflecting defeat. "Mark, what's going on?" I asked, a sinking feeling in my stomach. He looked up, his eyes tired and red. "The bakery, Ella. I can't keep it running anymore. We're bleeding money." My heart sank. "What are we going to do? We have Lily to think about." Mark ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd become all too familiar with. "I don't know, Ella. I really don't. I never thought it would come to this." I sat down beside him, trying to process the news. "Maybe it's time to consider other options. You could look for a job, at least until we figure things out." Mark's expression hardened. "A job? Work for someone else?" "I'm a business owner, Ella, not some office drone." I tried to keep my voice calm. "Mark, this isn't about pride. It's about our family, about making ends meet." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, and stormed out of the room, leaving me with a pile of unpaid bills and a head full of worries. The next day, I decided to talk to Susan, hoping she might be able to get through to Mark. I dialed her number, my hands shaking slightly. "Susan, it's about the bakery. Mark's really struggling, and I think he needs to consider looking for a job," I said, trying to sound diplomatic. "A job? My son is not going to work for someone else. He's a business owner, Ella. He's better than that," Susan snapped. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my frustration in check. "Susan, the bakery is closing. We have bills to pay, a daughter to raise. This isn't about being better than anything. It's about survival," Susan scoffed. "Survival? You always exaggerate, Ella. Mark will figure it out. He doesn't need to stoop to being an employee." The conversation went nowhere, and I hung up feeling more helpless than ever. Mark's refusal to face reality, combined with Susan's delusional support, was a recipe for disaster. That night, Mark and I sat in silence, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. I wanted to scream, to shout, to shake some sense into him, but I knew it would be pointless. The closure of the bakery brought more than just financial strain. It tore at the very fabric of our family life. Mark, once a bustling business owner, now spent his days idly lounging around the house. I'd come home exhausted from work, only to find dishes piled in the sink, laundry undone, and Lily left to her own devices. One evening, I arrived home later than usual, my head throbbing from a day filled with meetings. The house was in disarray, and the sight of Mark on the couch, beer in hand, watching TV, was the last straw. "Mark, what the heck? Look at this place. Can't you at least tidy up a bit?" I snapped, my patience wearing thin. Mark looked up, unfazed. Oh, come on, Ella. I met your maid, and I had a rough day. I was flabbergasted. Rough day doing what, Mark? You've been sitting here all day, he shrugged, taking another swig of his beer. I'm dealing with stuff, okay? It's not easy losing your business. I threw my bag down, frustration boiling over. And you think it's easy for me, working all day to keep us afloat while you do nothing. Mark stood up, his face a mask of anger. I'm not doing nothing, Ella. I'm trying to figure things out. Figure what out, Mark? How to avoid responsibility. We have a daughter, for God's sake, I retorted, my voice rising. He shot back. Don't you think I know that? I don't need you nagging me every day. The argument escalated with harsh words and accusations flying back and forth. Lily, hearing the commotion, came into the room, her eyes wide and scared. Mommy, Daddy, please stop yelling, she pleaded, her voice small and shaky. We both fell silent, the anger dissipating as we looked at our daughter. Mark muttered something under his breath and walked out, leaving me to comfort a crying Lily. The days that followed were a blur of silent meals, curt exchanges, and an ever-widening gulf between us. I was struggling to keep it together, juggling work, household chores, and caring for Lily, while Mark seemed to retreat further into his shell. The tension in our house had become a constant, like some unwelcome guest who had overstayed their welcome. But nothing prepared me for what came next. It began with small amounts of cash disappearing from my purse. Initially, I thought it was my own forgetfulness, but then the sums grew larger. One evening, after realizing another missing $50, I confronted Mark. He was in the living room as usual, eyes fixed on the TV. Mark, have you been taking money from my purse? I asked, attempting to keep my voice steady. He didn't look at me. What? No, why would I do that? I felt a surge of anger. Because it's missing, Mark, and I know I didn't spend it. Mark finally turned to face me, his expression defensive. Look, I needed some cash, okay? It's not a big deal. I was incredulous. Not a big deal? It's stealing, Mark, from your own wife. He stood up, his voice rising. I don't need a lecture, Ella. I took a bit of cash for beer. It's not like I'm blowing it on something stupid. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Beer? You're stealing money for beer while I'm working day and night to keep the family together. Mark's face hardened. Yeah, beer. It's not like I have much else to enjoy these days. I felt a mix of anger and sadness. That's your excuse? I'm out there busting my back, and you're here drinking away our money. Mark scoffed. Oh, please, you're always so dramatic. It's just a few bucks. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. This isn't just about the money, Mark. It's about trust. How can I trust you if you're stealing from me? Mark didn't answer, just turned back to the TV, effectively ending the conversation. The next day, I made a decision. I called Susan to talk about the situation. It's about Mark. He's been taking money from my purse for beer, I said, attempting to keep my emotions in check. Susan laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Oh, Ella, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. He's just having a tough time right now. I couldn't believe her response. Susan, he's stealing from me. How can you just brush that off? Susan's tone was dismissive. He's your husband, Ella. What's yours is his. Besides, it's just a bit of cash. I felt a flash of anger. Just a bit of cash. That's not the point, Susan. He's not contributing anything. And now he's taking what little we have left. Susan was unyielding. Well, I don't see the problem. He needs to unwind. You're being too hard on him. I hung up, realizing that talking to Susan was pointless. She was never going to see things from my perspective. One morning, I woke up to find Mark's side of the bed empty. That wasn't unusual these days. But as hours turned into a full day without a word from him, worry started to set in. I called his phone repeatedly, but it went straight to voicemail. Finally, after a week of silence, I heard the front door open. Mark walked in, looking different. There was an unfamiliar air of confidence about him. He wasn't alone. His mother, Susan, strutted in behind him with a smug look on her face. Mark, where the heck have you been? I've been worried sick, I exclaimed, a mix of relief and anger washing over me. Mark looked at me, a smirk on his lips. Oh, Ella, always so dramatic. I have news. I was confused. News? What news? He pulled out a lottery ticket, waving it in front of me. This, my dear Ella, is our ticket out. I won, Ella. I won $10 million. My heart skipped a beat. What? How? Susan chimed in, her voice dripping with condescension. He bought a lottery ticket with your credit card. Looks like it was a smart investment after all. I was stunned. My credit card. You used my credit card without asking? Mark's smirk grew wider. Well, I needed something to cheer me up after all the nagging, and look, it paid off. The reality of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. He had taken my card, bought a lottery ticket, and won. It was almost too much to take in. But, Mark, that's our money then. We won, I said, still trying to process the news. Mark's expression turned cold. No, Ella, I won, and with this money, I'm starting a new life without you. I felt as if the floor had been pulled from under me. What are you saying? He was blunt, his words cutting deep. I'm saying I'm leaving you, Ella. I'm tired of this life, tired of you. I want a fresh start, and now I can afford it. Susan laughed, a cruel sound that made my skin crawl. Oh, Ella, you really thought you were so smart, didn't you? But you see, you've underestimated my son. He's a winner, and you're just left with nothing. Mark grabbed a suitcase he had apparently packed earlier. I'm moving in with Mom. You can keep the house and whatever else. I don't need it anymore. Reeling from Mark's departure and his shocking betrayal, I knew I had to act fast. The first thing I did was call a lawyer, Mr. Jacobs, a no-nonsense man with a reputation for being tough and fair. Mr. Jacobs, my husband won the lottery with a ticket he bought using my credit card. And now he's leaving me and taking everything, I explained, my voice shaking with emotion. Mr. Jacobs listened intently, his voice calm and steady. All right, Ella, let's meet tomorrow. We'll go over everything, and I'll see what we can do. The next day, I sat in Mr. Jacobs' office, poring over bank statements and the credit card transactions that showed the purchase of a lottery ticket. Based on this, we have a strong case, Mr. Jacobs said, his eyes scanning the documents. The ticket was bought with your money, which means you have a claim to the winnings. I felt a glimmer of hope. So what's our next step? We file for a court injunction to freeze the lottery winnings until this is sorted out legally. Then we prepare for a court battle, he replied, his tone determined. The court day arrived faster than I had anticipated. Mark and Susan were there, smug looks on their faces as if they had already won. My heart was pounding as I took my seat, Mr. Jacobs beside me. The judge, a stern-looking woman, called the court to order. Mr. Jacobs presented our case with clear, concise arguments, emphasizing the transaction and my contribution to our family's finances. Mark's lawyer tried to argue that the ticket was a separate entity from our marital assets, but Mr. Jacobs countered effectively, showcasing the joint nature of our finances and Mark's lack of contribution. Then it was time for Mark to take the stand. His lawyer asked, Mr. Johnson, did you use your wife's credit card to purchase the lottery ticket? Mark replied with a hint of arrogance in his voice. Yes, but it was just a stroke of luck. It has nothing to do with her. And what were your intentions with the winnings? His lawyer continued. Mark glanced at me before answering, to start a new life. I was tired of being underappreciated and belittled. I felt a surge of anger, but remained silent. It was my turn to testify. Mr. Jacobs asked me, Mrs. Johnson, can you tell the court about your financial contributions to your household? I took a deep breath. I've been the primary breadwinner for the past few years. I paid the bills, took care of our daughter, and even supported Mark's mother financially. The judge listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. After both sides presented their cases, she called for a recess before making her decision. The burden was excruciating. When summoned back in, the judge scrutinized both of us before announcing her decision. Considering the evidence and the circumstances, I rule that the lottery winnings are a joint marital asset. Therefore, I award 3/4 of the winnings to Mrs. Johnson and 1/4 to Mr. Johnson. Mark's face displayed shock, and Susan's smugness vanished. I released a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It was more than a legal triumph. It was justice. Life post-courtroom drama felt like stepping onto a new path, one brimming with possibilities and fresh challenges. My focus was on Lily, and with the hard-fought winnings, we secured a stable future. Meanwhile, rumors circulated that Mark and Susan had squandered their share on frivolous pursuits and were now left with nothing. One day, while running errands, I crossed paths with Mark. He was a mere shadow of his former self, unkempt, disheveled clothes, and an aura of defeat surrounding him. "Ella, look at what you've done to me. I'm broke and dead, and they're taking the house," he blurted out, his voice tinged with desperation. I looked at him, feeling no sympathy. "Mark, you did this to yourself. You and your mother couldn't handle the money, and now you're paying the price." He scowled, bitterness seeping through his words. "So you're just going to gloat, see me suffer?" I shook my head, my resolve unwavering. "I'm not gloating, Mark. I'm just living my life. You made your choices, and I made mine." He attempted to interject, but I cut him off. "You know, Mark, you and your mother never forgave me for claiming what was rightfully mine. You spend your share without a thought for the future. That's on you." Mark's face contorted with anger, but there was a hint of regret in his eyes. "You could have shared more. You could have." I interrupted him. "I could have what, Mark? Rescued you after you betrayed me? After you and your mother ridiculed me? No, I've moved on." He stood there defeated as I walked away. In that moment, I realized how far I had come. I had faced betrayal and heartache, but I hadn't let it break me. Instead, I built a better life for Lily and me, a life founded on hard work and prudent choices. Alex's sharp command pierced the noisy kitchen as he ordered, "Alara, get me some tea now." Pausing with soapy hands, I replied, "Hold on, I'm doing the dishes." His impatient tone interrupted. "Stop that and bring me the tea quickly. Can't you follow simple orders?" Mrs. Whitmore, my mother-in-law, chimed in from the living room, requesting sweet coffee while devouring cake with a malicious glint in her eyes. Looking at the towering stack of dishes, I sighed. "There are so many. Leave them for later. Just do what we say, useless wife." Alex's words were like a whip, each one stinging. At 28, I was a Lara, a working mom feeling trapped in a life more like a prison than a home. Married at 23, I had hoped for love and companionship, but found myself entangled with Alex and his domineering mother. My only source of joy, our 4-year-old son, was a bright spot in my otherwise bleak world. Living in Alex's parents' house was a decision forced upon me under the guise of caring for Mrs. Whitmore after my father-in-law's passing. At first, I felt sorry for her apparent grief, but it soon became evident that I was just a pawn in her cruel game of domestic control. Whether it was cooking, cleaning, or working, my efforts were never enough. Mrs. Whitmore would scorn my meals, leaving them untouched or harshly criticizing them. "The stir-fry is so half-hearted," she'd scoff. "Cook it properly from scratch." "I'm busy and can only make simple things," I'd reply, trying to keep my composure. "That's why I hate back talk from a daughter-in-law," she'd snap. "Cook from scratch. Why don't you cook then? You're a good cook, right?" I dared to retort once, instantly regretting it. "Why would I do housework when you're here?" Her response was cold and dismissive. "Are you out of your mind?" Their cruelty escalated from harsh words to a chilling silence. They began to completely ignore me, as if I were a ghost haunting my own home. My presence, once undervalued, now felt entirely invisible. 5 years passed in this suffocating atmosphere. Alex and I turned 35 and 33, respectively. Our son grew, but the oppressive air in the house remained unchanged. My 63-year-old mother-in-law seemed to feed off my unhappiness. One evening, As I dragged myself home from work, a heavy realization hit me. I felt utterly purposeless in their eyes, a shadow, unseen and unheard. The only voice acknowledging me was that of my son, and the thought of losing even that small recognition was unbearable. Upon returning home, I immediately started cooking, attempting to dispel the gloom. I prepared mapo tofu, fried chicken, and a bell pepper and pork stir-fry, hoping to inject some normalcy into our dinner. Abruptly breaking his long silence, Alex commanded, "Bring me the mayo." "Sure, here you are," I replied, handing him the mayonnaise. His first words to me in ages were not of gratitude or conversation, but a mere order. It proved to be the final straw, the breaking point of my patience and tolerance. The evening took a darker turn when Mrs. Whitmore insisted, "Clean the toilet." "What now?" I exclaimed. "Yes, now," she insisted, her voice filled with venom. Unable to contain my frustration, I snapped back, "Don't say such a thing while we're eating. It's nasty, just like your heart," she hissed. Our argument with Alex quickly escalated, and he demanded that I apologize to his mother. However, for the first time in years, I stood my ground and refused. The conflict reached its zenith, and in that moment, a decision solidified within me. I realized I needed to escape this toxic environment, not just for my sake, but for the well-being of my son. Retreating to my room, my determination strengthened. I downloaded divorce papers, filled them out, and slammed them in front of Alex. His shock was evident, but I felt nothing but a cold resolve. "I'm filing these," I declared, my voice unwavering. Facing my husband's bewildered expression, I recognized that I had finally stepped out of the shadows. It was time to reclaim my life. The days following my declaration of divorce were filled with cold glares and biting remarks. However, amidst this storm, I discovered an unfamiliar sense of liberation. One evening, as I served dinner, Mrs. Whitmore disdainfully looked at the meal. "You call this food? Even a child cooks better," she remarked. I bit my tongue, focusing on my son's smiling face. "Eat up, sweetheart. I made your favorite tonight," Alex chimed in, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, playing the perfect mother now, are we? What a joke." Despite the anger simmering within me, I maintained my composure. "I'm just trying to make a nice dinner for our son," I calmly replied. Mrs. Whitmore scoffed. "Don't act high and mighty. You're just a burden in this house." The tension at the table thickened, and Alex's attempts to belittle me only intensified. "So, Alara, have you thought about how you'll survive after the divorce? You can barely keep a house, let alone your own life," Alex challenged. I looked him squarely in the eye. "I have been supporting this family for years. I'm not worried about taking care of myself and our son." Mrs. Whitmore interjected, "We manage. We don't need your pity money." However, Alex's silence spoke volumes. He knew the truth. Without my income, they would be in dire straits. In the following days, their behavior became increasingly erratic. Mrs. Whitmore oscillated between sweet-talking me into staying and hurling insults when I didn't comply. Alex, on the other hand, appeared lost, his arrogant facade crumbling as the reality of his financial dependence became undeniable. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation between them that sent shivers down my spine. "She can't leave us like this," Alex hissed. "We need her money." Mrs. Whitmore's response was cold and calculated. "Don't worry, I have a plan. We'll make her life so miserable she won't dare to leave." Hearing their true intentions laid bare was a revelation. They didn't care about me or even our son. It was all about control and money. That night, as I lay in bed, a plan started to take shape in my mind. If they wanted a battle, I would give them one. However, it wouldn't be fought with words or petty arguments. I intended to hit them where it hurt the most, their pride and their wallets. The next morning, I began putting my plan into action. I reached out to a lawyer, a sharp and no-nonsense woman who came highly recommended. "I want a divorce, and I want to ensure they don't get a penny more than they deserve," I stated firmly. She nodded, her eyes gleaming with determination. "We'll make sure of that. You've been the sole breadwinner, right?" We'll use that. As the days went by, my determination only strengthened. I began documenting everything: the insults, the financial manipulation, even the smallest grievances. It was time to flip the script and make them face the consequences of their actions. Building my case, a newfound sense of empowerment filled me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. The shadows of contempt were slowly lifting, and in their place, a new dawn was emerging. As the divorce proceedings kicked off, the atmosphere in the house became increasingly toxic. Yet with each passing day, my fear diminished, replaced by unwavering resolve. One evening, Mrs. Whitmore attempted a different approach. "Alara, dear, why don't we forget all this nasty business? You know we're family." Her words oozed insincerity. I met her gaze without flinching. "Family doesn't treat each other the way you've treated me," I responded. Alex, quietly observing, scoffed. "Oh, playing the victim now? You're not as innocent as you pretend to be." Despite a surge of anger, I kept my voice calm. "I'm not playing anything, Alex. I'm just no longer willing to be your scapegoat." The conversation shifted, as it often did, to finances. "You think you can just take our son and leave? How will you support him?" Alex challenged. I smiled, a small, confident curve of my lips. "I've been supporting this family for years. I think I can manage." Mrs. Whitmore's expression twisted into a sneer. "You're nothing without us. You'll come crawling back." But their words no longer held power over me. I grasped my self-worth and embraced the truth. The following day, I met with my lawyer once more. She outlined the strategy clearly: expose their financial dependency on you. It will be pivotal in the custody battle and asset division. I nodded, feeling a sense of validation. The law was on my side, and I was prepared to fight back. At home, the tension reached its zenith. Mrs. Whitmore's attempts to undermine me grew more desperate. "You think you're so smart," she spat one evening, "but you're just a cold-hearted woman abandoning your family." Meeting her gaze directly, I replied, "No, I'm a woman who's finally standing up for herself." Alex interjected, his voice dripping with venom. "You'll regret this. You can't survive without me." However, his threats fell on deaf ears. I was done being intimidated. In the following days, my preparations for the court battle intensified. I gathered financial statements, recorded their abusive remarks, and collected evidence of their negligence. One afternoon, as I organized my documents, my son approached me. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" His voice was small and uncertain. I pulled him into a hug. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be just fine. We're leaving this place, and we're going to start a new, happy life, just you and me." His arms tightened around me, and in that moment, I knew I was making the right decision. In the following days, my preparations for the court battle intensified. I gathered financial statements, recorded their abusive remarks, and collected evidence of their negligence. One afternoon, as I organized my documents, my son approached me. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" His voice was small and uncertain. I pulled him into a hug. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be just fine. We're leaving this place, and we're going to start a new, happy life, just you and me." His arms tightened around me, and in that moment, I knew I was making the right decision. The day of the court hearing drew near, carrying with it a sense of imminent freedom. I was prepared to confront Alex and Mrs. Whitmore, determined to put an end to their control and emotional abuse. Ready to reclaim my life, I aimed to provide my son with the peace and happiness he deserved. Justice awaited, and I was resolute in ensuring it would be served. The day of the court hearing arrived, a moment I had both dreaded and anticipated. As I sat across from Alex and Mrs. Whitmore in the courtroom, a surreal feeling washed over me. This was the pivotal moment when everything would change. The proceedings commenced with a chilly formality. Alex's lawyer painted him as a devoted husband and father unjustly burdened by false accusations. Mrs. Whitmore played the role of the grieving mother-in-law mistreated by an ungrateful daughter-in-law. However, their performance was transparent, their lies fragile. When it was my turn to speak, I addressed the court clearly, my voice unwavering. I have been the sole provider for this family for years. My husband's employment and his mother's manipulation have consistently strained our household. Alex interjected, feigning hurt in his voice. Alara, how can you say these things? I've always supported you. Turning to him, I maintained an unyielding gaze. Support entails more than just words, Alex. It's about actions, and your actions have shown nothing but selfishness and cruelty. The judge attentively listened as I presented my evidence, financial statements, recordings of their verbal abuse, and testimonies from neighbors who had witnessed their behavior. The undeniable truth unfolded. As the evidence piled up, Alex's facade crumbled, and Mrs. Whitmore's composed demeanor faltered, revealing a slipping mask of innocence. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence, tension thick in the air. Then came the revelation that sealed their fate. My lawyer presented photographs and documents providing evidence of Alex's infidelity and Mrs. Whitmore's clandestine affair with a wealthy neighbor, Mr. Harwood. Murmurs erupted in the courtroom as compromising images were displayed, exposing their deceit. Their true colors were revealed for all to witness. Alex's face turned pale, his eyes wide with shock. Mrs. Whitmore's expression morphed into one of fury, her hands trembling. You invaded our privacy. Mrs. Whitmore shrieked, her voice piercing. I looked at her, my voice calm but resolute. No, I exposed the truth. A truth that you both have concealed for too long. The judge called for order, but the damage was irreparable. Their credibility shattered, their lies laid bare in the harsh light of the courtroom. As the hearing concluded, the judge's decision was crystal clear. I was granted full custody of our son, and a fair distribution of assets was mandated. Alex and Mrs. Whitmore were left with little more than their shattered reputations. Stepping out of the courtroom, I felt a burden lift from my shoulders. The years of manipulation and emotional abuse were finally behind me. I had confronted my oppressors and emerged triumphant. Yet the most gratifying moment arrived when my son rushed into my arms outside the courthouse, his face beaming with relief and happiness. We did it, Mom, he exclaimed, his voice resonating with joy. Yes, we did, I replied, holding him close. We're free now. This marks the beginning for us. As we walked away hand in hand, I recognized that this triumph wasn't just for me. It was a victory for every individual who had ever felt belittled, powerless, or undeserving. It stood for truth and justice. A new chapter unfolding, filled with hope and the promise of a brighter future. The aftermath of the court ruling was swift and chaotic. News of Alex and Mrs. Whitmore's deceit swiftly circulated, staining their reputations in our tight-knit community. They could no longer shield themselves behind a facade of respectability. In the days following the verdict, I dedicated my efforts to rebuilding my life with my son. Yet, I couldn't deny the satisfaction that came from knowing Alex and Mrs. Whitmore were facing the consequences of their actions. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, an unexpected visitor arrived. Mrs. Harwood, the wife of the wealthy neighbor involved in the affair. Her eyes were red with unshed tears. Alara, I heard about everything. I can't believe what Sylvia, Mrs. Whitmore, did. Her voice broke, and I could see the pain etched on her face. I invited her in, offering a cup of tea. As we sat at the kitchen table, she poured out her heartache. Mrs. Whitmore's actions had caused more damage than she had ever anticipated. The next day, I encountered Alex in town. He was a mere shadow of his former self, his arrogance replaced by a defeated look. Alara, please, can we talk? He asked, his voice barely audible. I stopped, facing him. What is there to talk about, Alex? Fidgeting, he couldn't meet my eyes. I am sorry for everything. I didn't realize how much I depended on you, on your strength. Though belated, his apology signaled a shift in power. He had lost everything, his dignity, his home, his family, and in that loss, he had finally acknowledged his own faults. However, it was Mrs. Whitmore who bore the brunt of the severe repercussions. Her involvement with Mr. Harwood not only tarnished her reputation, but also led to legal ramifications. Mrs. Harwood initiated divorce proceedings and pursued a lawsuit against her for alienation of affection. Through whispers and rumors from neighbors, I learned about Mrs. Whitmore's plight, a narrative depicting a woman undone by her own choices. She had become an outcast, rejected by those she had once considered friends. One afternoon, I spotted her at the grocery store, her eyes lowered as she hurried through the aisles. Our paths intersected, and for a moment, our eyes locked. The unmistakable look of resentment and defeat lingered in her gaze. "You did this to me," she hissed under her breath as she passed by. Observing her departure, I felt a blend of pity and vindication. "No, Sylvia, you did this to yourself," I whispered to myself. The wheels of justice had turned, and the repercussions of their actions were now inescapable. Alex and Mrs. Whitmore grappled with the life they had constructed through years of deceit and manipulation. Witnessing their struggle with the aftermath, I realized that the most potent revenge was living well, liberated from their toxic influence, redirecting my attention to my son and our fresh start. I acknowledged that this wasn't merely a tale of revenge. It was a narrative of liberation, of breaking free from the chains of abuse and control. Looking ahead, I recognized that the best was yet to come.